Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about what emergency preparedness lessons could be learned from the water crisis that is currently affecting residents in Tennessee. So let's get right into it. If you look at the image on your screen, you'll see that this is the foreseeable outcome to foreseeable crises. And the loss of water is certainly a foreseeable crisis. This is probably going to happen at least once in your lifetime. So if your plan and your preparation is to wait until the emergency to start preparing, well, take a look at the screen. How many of those people probably had the same plan or no plan at all, which is basically the same thing. If you wait to prepare until you're forced to, you are going to be joining potentially an exponentially growing number of people fighting for a drastically decreasing number of resources. Now, in this case, how likely is it that they could just go to their supermarket, Target, Costco, and pick up some cases of water? You think they're the only ones who would have thought of that? Not likely. How likely do you think there's going to be stocked shelves during an ice storm when it's so cold that these pipes have broken, which is what caused the majority of these crises in Tennessee to begin with? So you cannot wait until you're put in the same position as thousands or hundreds of thousands of your community peers fighting for not just the same amount of resources, but drastically fewer, with a drastic increase in the demand for them. So the 5 W's of this crisis, starting with who. So it's generally, what we're talking about tonight, are the residents of Tennessee, specifically Memphis, who are served by the Memphis Light, Gas, and Water local systems. The what, we're talking about water shortages and outages, which were accompanied by boil water advisories. So most people that are affected by this don't even have water. Maybe they do now, but now they're being told to boil water because the systems were not reliable enough to ensure that the water that's coming out of their tap is even safe to drink. So now you have to make sure that your gas line, your appliances are working as well. Where? We're talking about Tennessee, we're talking about the residents in Memphis, surrounding areas, and even though I already mentioned this, where it's useful to understand that this happened before, not a long time ago, less than a year ago in Tennessee for a different reason. And it left residents with the same outcome, either no water or boil water. And this is because diesel spilled in their water supply. So they were told, do not even drink the water. You have to just use bottled water. Diesel is a very difficult contaminant to remove. So the win is that this has been happening this month, January 2024. It's been exacerbated by these extreme cold weather conditions that have been cracking pipes, over 4,000 reported incidents of cracked pipes. And again, the why, this feeds into the why. It's because of the freezing temperatures, which is destroying these pipes. It's causing them to explode because of the ice that builds up inside of them if there is not enough of a water flow to keep things moving. So it's a crisis. Water after oxygen is one of your foremost priorities. And you lose that, you lose the ability to live. It's not something you can just power through like other factors, like hunger, for example, or exhaustion. All right, so here's one of the 6 things that residents could and should have considered before they were forced to think about an emergency after it was too late. And that is a PACE plan. So a PACE plan is an acronym. PACE stands for primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. And think of it just as your first resort, second, third, and last resort. Now, the question for you that you need to start thinking about is, should your primary be your emergency water? That is one of your most precious resources. And it's precious for reasons other than just the obvious of you need water for yourself, your family, and your pets to drink. It's precious because It is a critical barter item. So you don't want to be relying on your stored bottled water right off the bat. You also don't want to be giving it out right away. I recommend that you save it as your last resort. That is your emergency. That is your fourth and final last resort. Your primary might be your water purifier. Your alternate might be your water filter. Contingency might be whatever you can think of. Maybe you have the water in pipes of your house. You have a pond. You have a pool that you can filter as long as it's not a saltwater pool. So think of it now. Think of where you would get your primary water, and that could be a creek. So you know where your water sources are. I know that I have access to the following. I have a creek less than a half mile from my house. There's a river that is about 6 miles. There is a golf course that's on our property, on our community, that has a water hazard. There is an ocean that I can desalinate using a Quench C portable desalinator. And then there's also the pipes. There's the water heater, although we have a tankless now, so that's not gonna help us anymore. We have a dehumidifier, which you can run and extract water out of the air as long as you have power. If it's during the hot summer months, you can run your home's air conditioner and tap into the condensation valve. Now, in case it's not obvious, these sources that I just mentioned are not sources of potable water. Now, forgive me if I'm saying potable and it should be pronounced potable. I've heard it both ways. I'm gonna say potable water, drinkable water. You cannot drink this water from any of those sources until it's filtered and or purified. And I'll get into that in the next slides. So think about where your primary sources of water are going to be. It shouldn't just be the bottled water that you have in your garage. And I'll talk about why that's a problem when you have those 16.9 ounce bottles in a minute, in addition to the hazards that I've already discussed. So be familiar with the topography in and around your community and have the ability to transport water. And I'll talk about that in another slide. Emergency water capture. So now that you've identified several potential sources that you're going to triage into your primary, your alternate, your contingency, and then lastly, your emergency, your last resort sources for water, what are you going to do to capture these water sources, to bring the water from that location back to your house or your bug out camp? So you need collapsible vessels. And you have some of my favorite options would be a collapsible water bladder, because it takes up hardly any space, it rolls up, it's there when you need it, and you can use it for just your potable water. You want to have different types of water vessels, and here's why. You don't want to ever cross-contaminate something that was used for non-potable water for potable water. Once it touches non-potable water that is potentially contaminated, such as from a lake, a river, a stream, it will never be used for potable water. That's why you want to have multiple sources for water capture. So I like a collapsible water bladder as well as a water block, as you'll see on the screen. You can even use a collapsible shower, like the Helio shower from Nemo. And that makes it pretty obvious that this is not for drinking water. This is water that we're going to use just for showering, just for dishwashing, just for cleaning, hygiene, first aid perhaps. But you'd probably be better off using your potable water for first aid so you're not introducing bacteria. But I think you are starting to get the point. If you're trying to keep crucial plants alive, these are not ornamental plants, these are life-giving plants, either for sustenance or for medicinal purposes. That would be a good use of your non-potable water. So you want to have more than one device to capture water. As the saying goes, 2 is 1, 1 is none. So you want to have multiple for each category, because eventually one will fail you. And if you have a single point of failure, then you can consider that failure. So let's talk about emergency water filters. So one of my favorites is the Survivor Pro X. That is a powered water filter. Now, it's not necessarily a water purifier, so you'd want to filter the water first. And one of the reasons why I like this model is that it's a powered water filter, which also means it's a water pump. Now, why is that important? Well, first, how are you going to get the water from the water source, such as the pond, into your water vessel? You need to pump it or dunk your bucket underneath, fill it that way, which you can do, of course, but it's much easier and safer to use something like the Survivor Pro X. And here's why. It's 2-in-1. It's a pump and it's a filter. So as you're pumping the water from the pond into your perhaps potable water vessel, even if it's not for potable water, it's going to automatically filter that water to pretty much 5 nines, 99.999% reduction in parasites, in waterborne contaminants. So that can only help. You're leaving the majority of the bacteria behind in the pond. You're taking that water, pumping it from that source into your vessel. It's powered by AA batteries, which means you can get rid of the disposable batteries and swap in USB rechargeable batteries, such as pale blue USB rechargeable batteries. I have another video on those. And the advantage to that is that they can be recharged through a multitude of other sources, such as your car's USB port, any solar panel with a USB output, any other device, any portable power bank that has a USB-A output. So you can also charge and power the Pro X just from a power bank directly. Next, the Berkey. So the Berkey is a filter and it's a purifier as well. It will remove most VOCs, volatile organic compounds. You can even filter the water from a chlorine swimming pool. As long as it's not a saltwater-based swimming pool, you can drink the water out of that if you pass it through a Berkey. Some of the advantages of the Berkey: there's no battery, no moving parts, it's only gravity fed. And it uses these charcoal filters that are good for about 6,000 gallons. And you can filter some disgusting water. You could even filter out your urine, according to the reports. Not that this would be something that you want to experiment with, but I recommend getting a Berkey. It collapses in on itself, looks like a coffee maker, doesn't take up much space at all. They have different sizes, and get at least 2 sets of the Berkey charcoal filters, because you cannot store 12,000 gallons of water, unless you have a water buffalo perhaps, but you cannot store that much water. That's why you get so much bang for the relatively small size of these charcoal filters. And keep them vacuum sealed, they'll last you many, many years just in storage. So those are the water filters. There's obviously other examples, but these are just enough to get you started. Now, for water purification, one of the best methods is thermal purification, and here's why. It's inexhaustible. If you use chemical-based water purification, you are going to run out of the chemical. If you're using bleach, bleach has a very short shelf life, and you can only use 100% bleach, nothing that has added scents. And if you have bleach, it's going to expire in less than a year, perhaps just 6 months. So look on the label. Just because it smells strong doesn't mean it is strong. And you're risking your life if you use bleach that is not at the right concentration. Now, you can make your own bleach. You can use sodium hypochlorite. That can be stored in a dry form. It'll last a lot longer. It's extremely potent, so be very careful with how much you dilute it. But that is chemical purification. The reason why I prefer thermal purification, such as with the Solo Stove Mini, as you see on your screen, is that you have an unlimited supply of fuel, because it can burn twigs and sticks. You can find those everywhere. Those are going to be endless. And you can get a rolling boil as long as you have a stainless steel cup, a vessel that you can boil water with. Now, this isn't the Stanley Cup challenge. I hope this stupid TikTok challenge doesn't jacked up the price of these Stanley cups. I'm sure it's a different cup altogether than the ones I've been using for a long time. But these are almost indestructible. They will last you decades. And they have a lid with a handle that flips over the lid to keep the lid in place. It folds back so you can grab the Stanley steel metal cup off the fire without burning your hand. Just make sure whatever you use is single-walled stainless steel. Do not get anything that's double or triple layered. You don't want insulated mugs because the air between those layers can expand and explode. It also will very much inhibit the transfer of the heat to the water inside. That's the point of those insulated vessels, and that's why you don't want one for these purposes, for thermal purification. If you can get it to a rolling boil and get it there for 5 minutes, then that's good. It's going to be difficult if you're in a higher elevation, but pretty much nothing that's waterborne, that's a bacteria or a virus, can survive longer than 5 minutes in a rolling boil, and even a lot less, but 5 minutes to be extra safe. Speaking of extra safe, if you want it to be a belt and suspenders extra safe approach, I recommend you pass the water through your filter first and then you purify it. So filter the water and then boil it. And that would save you from having to wait in those desperate lines of desperate people. Think about how miserable that would have been for those people. And it still is for the people that are doing this today. Having to leave your freezing house to drive in the freezing cold weather in your car with the risk of you crashing, sliding out on the ice, the risk of you getting mugged on your way back after you waited in line for potentially 6 hours in the open air, in the freezing temperature that's so cold, it created this whole mess because it was breaking the supply lines, the water pipes. So you're on your way back and somebody realizes you have water, they see you just left this distribution camp, they don't want to wait in line, and you have no ability to defend yourself. So these are all foreseeable downstream effects from not preparing. If you still don't think preparation is critical, well, maybe I can convince you by the end of this video. Lastly, emergency water storage. So if you're going to store water, which of course you should, don't do what the generic advice is, and that's to store those bottled water, 16.9 ounce standard size bottles of water. And here's why. They are so thin with the plastic now, mainly for environmental reasons, but also for cost cutting. They are using such thin plastic walls in these disposable water bottles now that they start breaking down within a year. And in fewer than 5 years, you're going to have a significant amount of the plastic from the plastic that it's made in. The whole bottle itself is just oil, it's petroleum products and chemicals. And that's what's leaching into your water that you're directly digesting into your system. So here's a better option. There are options that are designed for long-term water storage, which should augment everything I talked about before in terms of water filter, water purifiers. And that is one example, the Purify. That will give you 12 to 20 years of shelf life. And it's really closer to 20, as long as you keep it in a temperature controlled environment, off the ground, don't disrupt the seal. These are very thick plastic. You'll see, if you buy the Purify, you'll see how thick the plastic bottle is. You'll see how well the seal is. And you should try opening one just to see how well it is sealed. It's far different from what you're used to, and that's why they're so much more expensive. And that's also why you don't use those until you have to use those. Next, the large 5-gallon jugs of water. These are great for long-term storage. Just make sure you store them off the ground. So there's a few benefits to having a storage rack for these water jugs. First, you can store about 6 in not much longer or larger footprint than it would take to just store 2, because you can stack them on themselves and they are very well sealed, so they're not going to break down as rapidly as the 16.9 ounce bottles are, and they're far more rugged. If they fall off the rack during an earthquake, chances are they'll be fine. They are extremely thick. That's why they're so heavy also. But 1 gallon of water weighs about 8.5 pounds, so you figure these 5-gallon jugs are well over 60 pounds. So well over 50 pounds at least. So make sure that you're storing them in a place where if they do leak, it won't cause catastrophic water damage to your closet or wherever you keep these. What I recommend, if you have the ability, is to store them in a guest bathroom shower. If it's a shower that rarely gets used, the worst thing that would happen is that these water jugs maybe fall off. They're not going to go far. They'll be contained in your shower. And if one of them cracks wide open, all the water is just going to go down the drain, rather than, in the worst case scenario, in the carpet, through the baseboard, through the drywall, perhaps through the ceiling if it's on a second floor. So all these things can be avoided. Now, lastly, you have pipes in your house that you can tap into as another source of emergency water. And if you have a multi-story house, what you can do is take your vessel, put it underneath one faucet, say in your downstairs guest bathroom, open that faucet. There won't be any water that comes out usually. Then go upstairs, open all the other faucets upstairs, and let that water collect at the bottom. It'll come out of the pipes. The water that's standing in the pipes will flush out. If you have a water heater, obviously you should use that. Make sure to drain your water heater once a year as well, so you reduce the amount of sediment that's going to flow out when you do need that emergency water. There are also multiple ways to capture water throughout your house, outside, if you have rain barrels. And what I recommend is considering portable, just collapsible rain barrels. I showed a picture of that earlier. Sometimes rain barrels are against the law, so that's another reason to keep it collapsed until it's an emergency. And if it's freezing, like it is in Tennessee and many states right now, you're not going to get rain coming out of your rain gutters, presumably. It's going to be snow. So you can use that to collect snow and then bring that inside and let it melt, filter it, purify it, drink it. So I hope you found these non-obvious suggestions to be helpful. I try to go beyond what you probably already know, what you've already heard from the government and from the news. These are things that I think, and I'm confident, could absolutely spare you from the fate that unfortunately is befalling many of our fellow Americans in Tennessee who either could not or did not prepare for this eventuality. And since they already had prior warning from the water catastrophe in Germantown of Tennessee last year, I don't understand how they could have been so off guard. I'm not trying to blame the victim, but there are things that you can and should and must do now. So in summary, we started talking about a PACE plan for your primary, alternate, contingency, emergency methods for harnessing an abundance of water from myriad sources in and outside your home. We talked about what those emergency sources might be: lakes, golf course water hazards, ponds, rivers, non-saltwater swimming pools, water heaters, pipes in your house, running the air conditioning and collecting the water through the discharge lines. If you have a dehumidifier and it's humid enough, running that. This would be more advantageous, these last two suggestions, for hot summer months when the water gets shut off. We talked about some water filter options, followed by some water purifiers, and lastly, emergency water storage, and why you absolutely should be storing the large 5-gallon jugs and the Purify portable long-term water bottles instead of the traditional Aquafina 16.9 ounce bottles that you're going to see at the store. And people are going to be very disappointed when they go to see that their water that they stored in those disposable bottles has leaked, has been bitten into by rats and rodents, which does happen, that the plastic that is just so thin now has failed. Those have a shelf life now on average of 3 years. Control what you can control, because most things in life are outside of your control. Therefore, the few things in life that are within your control, you have no excuse not to control them. If you found this helpful, please let me know. And if there's any other topics that you have suggestions for, like the person did for this topic, please share them. I look forward to making more videos if people are finding them useful. Your time is valuable. Thank you for sharing it with me.